In the early morning, I was already at my desk, staring at a line of code that looked cleaner than my love life and more honest than most people in executive parking. I had spent 8 years at Cinder Key Systems building tools that made expensive machinery behave like civilized adults. My title was systems engineer, though in practice I was part architect, part mechanic, part magician, and part babysitter for men who called every software issue a glitch, as if that word excused negligence. My manager, Ron Voss, had once been different from the rest. Older, sharp, dryly funny, always carrying legal pads filled with blocky handwriting, Ron had trained me when I was new enough to say sorry before asking a question. He taught me how to document design ownership, how to survive budget reviews, how to present technical work to people who thought servers ran on optimism. He also taught me that corporations rarely rewarded the quiet genius in the room unless she learned to protect herself. That last lesson was useful, though he probably regretted teaching it to me. Ron and I had been close in the way people become close when they survive product launches, system failures, and 6 kinds of executive panic together. He brought me tea when I forgot lunch. I fixed his slide decks when he confused confidence with chaos. I knew he was always strained for money. He complained in bits and flashes, never fully confessing, just enough to sound burdened. A divorce settlement, credit card bills, a nephew needing help, bad timing, always bad timing. I believed him because mentorship builds trust like ivy climbs brick. Quietly. Then, all at once. The invention that changed everything began as a side fix for a recurring failure in our industrial monitoring platform. I built a predictive load balancing module that could anticipate sensor bottlenecks before the system choked, reroute traffic, and flag potential equipment stress before a shutdown. In plain language, it could save clients millions and make our platform impossible for competitors to ignore. I showed Ron in a closed conference room sometime in the late afternoon. He watched the demo without interrupting, which should have warned me. Ron usually interrupted like it was a hobby. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his arms. "Good thinking," he said. "But it is too narrow. Clever engineering does not always become strategy. Put it aside. We need you focused on the compliance patch." Too narrow. That was like calling a diamond useful glass. I argued, politely at first, then with charts. He waved me off. Said the board would never care. Said timing was wrong. Said I would waste political capital pushing a pet project. He even smiled in that mentor way that once felt reassuring and now, in memory, feels like a locksmith testing my front door. So I shelved the presentation. Officially. Unofficially, I saved every design note, every version history, every test run, every timestamp, and every internal message tied to the build. Ron had taught me that too. Keep your receipts. In engineering and in life, memory is weak, but metadata has backbone. A few days later, we were in the boardroom sometime in the early afternoon, the kind of room designed to make ordinary employees feel like decorative furniture. I sat along the side wall with the rest of senior staff while Ron stood at the screen and clicked to a slide that made my stomach drop so hard I thought it might file for workers' compensation. My architecture, my diagrams, my module, my language, polished but unmistakable. He pitched my invention to the board as his breakthrough initiative. I went still. Not shocked still. Surgical still. A board member named Lyle Dane leaned forward with sudden interest. "Who developed this? This is the strongest product move we have seen all quarter." Ron did not blink. I did. Something sharp tore through my chest. Not heartbreak. Not exactly. It was the pain of recognition. The clean, cold understanding that betrayal feels worst when it arrives wearing a familiar face. I looked at Ron, waiting for the flinch, the correction, the shame. Nothing. He spoke for another 10 minutes while I sat there with my pulse thundering in my ears, realizing 2 things at once. He had stolen from me, and he had underestimated me. I confronted Ron sometime in the evening after the boardroom emptied and the office took on that false hush company's mistake for dignity. He was in his office, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, drinking sparkling water like a man trying to appear disciplined. I closed the door and set my notebook on the chair across from him. That was my work. He did not ask what I meant. He did not even perform outrage. He just pinched the bridge of his nose as if I were a scheduling problem. Calm down, Lena. I should tell you that my name is Lena Frost, and I have always hated being told to calm down by men whose plans are on fire. You used my design, my testing, my architecture, and my wording, I said, in front of the board. Then you claimed it. He exhaled hard. I positioned it. That is what managers do. No. Managers manage. Thieves position. That got his eyes up. For a long moment he said nothing. Then the polished mentor mask slipped. What showed underneath was ragged, tired, and mean. You think I had a choice? He said. You think brilliance pays fast enough? I needed something big. I stared at him. For what? He laughed once, ugly and hollow. For life, Lena. That answer was too vague to be accidental. People get vague when specifics are criminal, embarrassing, or both. I said nothing, and silence did what pressure does to a bad seal. It cracked him. It started with sports betting, he muttered. Then cards. Then online tables. I had a run. Then a bad run. Then a worse one. I moved money around. Borrowed. Covered losses. You know how it goes. I did, actually. Not from experience, but from watching my aunt lose half her retirement to a man who treated risk like romance. Addiction loves secrecy, and financial desperation breeds entitlement. A person drowning in bad decisions starts looking at other people's work as driftwood. You stole from me because you gamble. I borrowed momentum, he snapped. If this lands, I get the promotion package, bonus, equity bump. I clean up the debt, then I make it right. That sentence deserved a museum. It contained theft, delusion, and future tense morality all in one display case. You make it right by confessing tomorrow. His face hardened. Do not be naive. The board believes me. They will not destroy a division head over a dispute with an engineer. That was the moment he made his second mistake. His first mistake was stealing my work. His second was assuming I had nothing but indignation. I picked up my notebook and stood. You taught me to document authorship. He shrugged, but his mouth tightened. You taught me to preserve version history. No response. You taught me to separate invention from assignment when something has patent value. Now he looked at me carefully. Because yes, I had done that too. At home, on my own equipment, before moving it into company testing, I had drafted a memo to myself outlining the core algorithm. Then I emailed it to my personal attorney, Mina Rowe, a woman with the bedside manner of a velvet hammer. Mina handled my estate documents after my mother died and later convinced me to set up a living trust, a durable power of attorney, and an asset inventory. She said women with strong incomes were often excellent earners and terrible archivists. She was right. While preparing those documents, she also convinced me to retain clear records of inventions, equity grants, property titles, and compensation terms. A good file cabinet, she liked to say, is cheaper than a courtroom. I had laughed then. I was not laughing now. Over the next 2 days, I gathered everything: source logs, time-stamped drafts, security badge records showing when I used the lab, messages from Ron telling me to prepare technical validation, his comments inside my prototype files. I also found expense rumors swirling around him, whispers of short-term loans, frantic calls and missing reimbursements, not proof, but a weather pattern. I did not storm into human resources. Human resources is a decorative fern with payroll access. I called Mina. Then I called a board member. Then I started laying a trap so elegant it practically wore pearls. Mina Rowe met me for lunch sometime around midday in a quiet restaurant near the courthouse. where the napkins were crisp and the prices implied everyone inside was either billing hours or hiding assets. She listened without interrupting, which is how competent women gather power. I slid printed records across the table. She examined them with the calm pleasure of a chef checking fresh knives. "Well," she said, "he is either reckless or desperate. Both. Better. Desperate people leave fingerprints." Mina did not waste words. She sorted my options with surgical clarity. If the invention fell within my employment agreement, the company likely owned the work product, but not Ron personally. That mattered. Ownership and credit are cousins, not twins. If he misrepresented authorship to secure compensation, title, or equity, that could trigger internal fraud issues, employment violations, and fiduciary concerns. A manager pitching team output as his own to a board was not office drama. It was governance rot. She also reminded me of something every woman in a corporate fight should tattoo onto her strategic brain. Never confuse being right with being protected. Rights are paper until procedure gives them teeth. So we built procedure. First, I preserved all evidence outside company control. Second, I drafted a factual chronology with no emotional decoration. Judges, boards, and investigators trust timelines more than wounded eloquence. Third, Mina sent a quiet notice to the company's general counsel requesting a preservation hold on all communications and presentation materials related to the board meeting and my module. That one step was worth its weight in gold. Once preservation is triggered, deleting evidence becomes its own little bonfire. Then came the witty part. I emailed Ron and thanked him for championing my preliminary load balancing prototype, adding that I was preparing supporting technical records for the board follow-up discussion you mentioned. He replied within minutes. "Good. Keep it concise. We should position your support role carefully." There it was. My support role. In writing. He might as well have mailed me a monogrammed confession. Meanwhile, I called Lyle Dane, the board member who had asked who created the idea. Lyle had a reputation for being allergic to nonsense and unusually attentive when money was endangered, which made him my favorite kind of corporate reptile. I kept my tone crisp. "I need 10 minutes regarding the module presented at the last board session. This is a governance issue, not a grievance." That word did it. Governance. People ignore women when we say unfair. They lean in when we say liability. He gave me a meeting for some time in the early morning 2 days later. Before that meeting, I learned one more useful thing. Ron had recently tried to borrow against his home equity and had been denied. Not illegal information, just office chatter from a finance manager who owed me after I saved her team from a disastrous software rollout. She also mentioned Ron had been pressuring payroll about bonus timing. The pattern was loud enough now that I could hear it in heels. When I met Lyle, I brought a binder, a drive, and the kind of composure women earn after years of being told to smile through theft. I did not rant. I walked him through dated drafts, repository logs, technical comments, and the follow-up email from Ron. I explained the business impact too. If the company pursued patent filings or client commitments under false authorship claims, internal records could implode under discovery. Investors hate surprises, regulators hate altered provenance, lawsuits love both. Lyle asked only 3 questions. Did anyone else contribute meaningfully? Was I seeking compensation, correction, or litigation? Was I willing to present the module myself? My answer to the third came out so fast it nearly smoked. By sometime in the late afternoon, the board chair requested a special product review. Ron was copied. So was general counsel. So was internal audit. He came to my desk pale and furious. "What did you do?" I looked up from my keyboard. "Documentation. You always said it was the difference between engineering and storytelling." His jaw flexed. "You are blowing this out of proportion." "No," I said. "I am sizing it correctly." Then I smiled. Because revenge is pleasant, but accurate attribution with legal consequences is exquisite. The special review took place sometime in the early afternoon, and the room felt different from the first meeting. Less applause chamber, more operating theater. Present were the board chair, Lyle Dane, general counsel, internal audit, two members of finance, Ron, me, and enough tension to power the building without backup generators. Ron opened with his usual executive baritone, trying to reclaim the story through confidence. Confidence is a lovely accessory. It is less persuasive when sitting next to evidence. General counsel stopped him within minutes. Before we proceed, she said, we need clarity on development history, authorship representations, and internal records. Her voice was smooth as glass and just as warm. I was invited to present. Ron was invited to remain silent until questions reached him, which was the closest thing to poetry that room had ever produced. I walked them through the module from concept to prototype. I showed dated design notes, test environments, source commits, validation reports, and the sequence of meetings where Ron reviewed the work. I explained why the invention mattered commercially, how it reduced downtime risk, and how its implementation could be structured with proper patent evaluation and compensation alignment. I also made one point that landed especially well with the finance people. If incentive pay was awarded based on false authorship, any related compensation decision could become recoverable, disputed, or discoverable. Nothing focuses a room like the possibility of clawbacks. Then internal audit presented selected communications. One of them was Ron telling me to stop developing the tool because it was too narrow. Another was his message instructing me to prepare validation notes for his board pitch. His face changed color in stages, like a bad sunset. When they finally questioned him, he tried every old trick. He had supervised the work. He had shaped the strategic vision. He had assumed the prototype was team property. He had misspoken under pressure. Misspoken. I nearly admired the nerve. Then General Counsel asked the question that split him open. Did you disclose to the board that the technical solution was developed by Ms. Frost? He paused. A fatal pause. No. Did you claim it as your own idea? Another pause. Yes, but only because I intended to manage the rollout. Translation. Yes, and I hoped success would bleach the theft. The rest moved quickly. Ron was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His pending promotion review was frozen. Access to certain systems was suspended. Compensation matters would be examined. An internal audit would review whether any other work had been misattributed. I did not have to ask for any of it. Once truth enters a boardroom wearing a liability badge, self-interest does most of the lifting. Afterward, Ron caught me outside the room. You ruined me. I laughed softly. No. You put yourself on layaway and called it strategy. He looked older then, not wiser, just smaller. You could have handled this privately. And let a gambling man negotiate from a lie? His silence answered for him. Here is the part many people misunderstand about power. The goal is not to scream louder than the person who wronged you. The goal is to move the decision into a structure where facts matter more than his charm. Paper trails, counsel, audit, governance, compensation review. Those are not dry concepts. They are steel doors. Within a week, I was asked to lead formal development of the module with direct visibility to the Board Technology Committee. Mina negotiated my new compensation package, including title adjustment, invention recognition language, bonus metrics, and a review of intellectual property credit procedures across the company. She also had me update my trust documents and beneficiary designations because, as she noted over dinner, women get promoted and forget that money needs instructions. I did not forget. I increased my emergency reserves, tightened account security, reviewed my homeowner's policy, and moved future equity planning into a clean estate file. Betrayal had sharpened me, but it also reminded me of something plain and powerful. A woman does not become secure by being brilliant alone. She becomes secure by making sure her brilliance is documented, compensated, and legally difficult to steal. Ron taught me that. I doubt he meant to. By sometime in the early morning a month later, I stood in the glass lab overlooking the production floor while my team prepared the final demonstration of the module that Ron once dismissed, then stole, then lost his career over. The company had renamed it Frost Mesh, which I thought was excessive, but after years of having my work folded into other people's glory, I was willing to tolerate a little tasteful vanity. Ron was gone. Officially, he had resigned during the investigation. Unofficially, he had been cornered by facts, debt, and the collapse of his own performance myth. Internal review found irregular expense behavior and prior instances of credit inflation, not enough to make a headline, enough to end a career. I felt no pity. Compassion is not a prepaid gift card for repeat offenders. The board brought in a new division lead named Owen Lark, a man with the rare executive quality of listening without immediately composing his own legend. On his second day, he asked me what had made the theft possible in the first place. That question impressed me more than any compliment. Culture, I said, and informality. Too much trust in verbal credit. Not enough process around authorship, invention disclosures, performance metrics, and manager oversight. He nodded and, to my astonishment, fixed it. A formal invention registry was created. Presentation materials required contributor sign-off. Bonus recommendations tied to innovation had to include documentary support. Managers could no longer launder team output through charisma and a laser pointer. It was almost romantic. I also started mentoring younger women in engineering, though with one difference from the old Ron model. I did not teach loyalty. I taught structure. Save your drafts. Know your employment agreement. Understand what your company owns and what it merely touches. Review beneficiary forms after every major compensation change. Keep separate records for equity, patents, property, and insurance. If a relative asks to be added to a deed, for convenience, call a lawyer before you call a pen. If someone pressures you to co-sign, stall until you can read every line in peace. If a boss praises your genius in private but omits your name in public, that is not clumsy leadership. That is reconnaissance for theft. The module launched to our first major client sometime in the late afternoon on a rainy day, and the rollout went clean. Very clean. The savings projections exceeded expectations. The board applauded. This time, when Lyle Dane introduced the project, he said, "Designed and led by Lena Frost." I will admit it. That landed like music. Later, Mina and I celebrated over dinner. She lifted her glass and said, "To documentation, the least glamorous form of self-respect." I raised mine back. "To women who keep records and receipts." There was laughter and relief, and that quiet sense of internal furniture settling into stronger places. I still think about Ron sometimes, usually when some polished man in a meeting acts offended by accountability. I remember how easy it is for women to mistake guidance for safety, mentorship for character, familiarity for trustworthiness. Skill can be taught by someone who has none of the ethics required to deserve your confidence. That truth used to make me sad. Now it just makes me organized. I did not get revenge by wrecking his life. He had already been doing that quite efficiently himself. I got something better. I got my name back. I got paid. I got protection written into process. And I got to stand in a room full of important people while they learned a lesson many of them should have learned years ago. When a smart woman builds something valuable, the clever move is not to steal it. The clever move is to make sure she never has a reason to come for you.